Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Bridge of Worlds podcast. I'm your host, Ioannis Kokinos. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're on YouTube watching, thank you for tuning in. And if you're on one of the podcast platforms, thank you for tuning in as well. So today I had quite a moment at the gym. I was training at the gym. I went to the gym today for my workout. And there was a woman there training, but she happened to have her son there with her. He was about 6 or 7 years old. So he was kind of like following her around the gym. It's not a very big gym. And I caught him a few times staring at me, like from the corner of my eye. I wasn't looking directly at him. I don't want to scare or intimidate him. But you know how children are, you know how we used to be, right? Curious and watchful. So out of the corner of my eye, I caught him looking at me, like admiring me, right? I was doing my workout. And it just kind of immediately brought me back to that part of myself, my 6, 7 year old self, right? And it also felt like a very nice confirming message as to how far I've come. I mean, um, as far as like my healing journey is concerned, the knowledge I've gained, what I've learned, and being here and sharing things with you, it hasn't been easy, to say the least. I meditate daily. I do all kinds of inner child work, inner child activations. But it's the first time something like this happened. Normally, like when my inner child comes through, my younger self comes through during a meditation, it's because I'm reaching out and setting up a safe space, as I've been talking about, creating a container, holding the space, witnessing without judgment, which I'll get into in today's episode. But today was the opposite. It felt like my inner child reached out to me, and it was very nice. It was a very nice feeling. It felt like he wanted to say that he loves me and that he's proud of me and that he is rooting for me. And as I said, it's always the other way around, right? Like when our inner child comes through, whether it's through psychotherapy, meditation, some form of, channeling, depending on the modality, it's basically because our child needs something from our present adult selves. So, this is what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about deepening this connection between man and inner child, man and his inner boy. So, last week I talked about the shadow. I did touch upon some aspects of inner child healing and basically that the shadow holds our inner child wounding. But today I want to approach it from really what it can look, feel like, even through meditating, even through inner child activations, right? Like we hear timelines in the spiritual communities, we hear about quantum jumping, right? There's linear time and then there's non-linear time. So I want to just talk about all this today. I want to bring it to the space where I'm at with all of this and what I can offer you as far as your healing journey is concerned. And of course, to definitely make contact, definitely touch base with that younger part of you, especially if you're a man listening, because as men, it's more difficult. It's always more difficult for us because we are more emotionally suppressed. We are more challenged when it comes to emoting and expressing feeling. And especially if we have, painful experiences as far as our inner child is concerned, then it can make it all that more difficult. Now, of course, it's not only one inner child. We have many inner children. We have an inner 1 year old. We have an inner 5 year old. We have an inner 10 year old. We have inner teenagers, right? The inner 13-year-old is very different from the inner 17-year-old, right? So it is important to, let's say, when we're setting up a space, and for me, this always comes with meditation, right? My meditative practices are not always just sitting in silence. I always, of course, put some form of music on. Usually I go with solfeggio frequencies, right? So these are certain frequencies that hit certain chakras, certain energy centers of the human body. Sometimes, though, I really need to play a specific song in order to activate a certain timeline. And I do this quite often. And sometimes it happens in the car, sometimes it happens at the gym, sometimes it happens whenever and wherever, right? We have music that we've been listening to our whole lives. We had music we were listening to when we were young, when we were teenagers, when we were children. I'm a millennial. I was born in 87. So I was a child growing up in the 90s. Best decade ever. Sorry, not sorry, but the 90s were the best. Best music, best movies, best shows, best everything. So sometimes I'll hear a song, let's say from the 90s, and automatically that part of me becomes activated. And sometimes it's joy, sometimes it's excitement, sometimes it's grief, sometimes it's sorrow, right? And I can hear the same song a few times, let's say throughout a couple of months or even a year. And sometimes the same song will evoke a lot of joy and happiness. Sometimes it will evoke grief, right? Because it is a time that no longer exists. That part of me really, yes, is with me, right? Like my inner child is with me. That part of me is with me, but it's also gone, right? And there's a lot of grief that can come with inner child healing and when we are meditating and activating younger parts of ourselves. So it is especially important to hold the grief, to be able to hold the grief and to be with that grief because we didn't grieve at that time, right? At that time, we were living life. We were 5, we were 10, we were 15 years old. And let's say our 15-year-old might have been thinking back to their 5-year-old self, right? So there was some form of grief there, but maybe that 15-year-old didn't know how to mourn or hold that grief, right? So it was suppressed. So this connection between boy and man, right? Like when we're talking about integrating the shadow and, masculine power, that's essentially just saying really developing and cultivating a loving relationship with the inner boy. Because our child, our inner child, is our sense of excitement. It's our sense of curiosity. It's our sense of awe. It's a sense of like experiencing the miraculous in the world, right? And we lose touch. We disconnect from these aspects of ourselves because we quote unquote grow up and we need to get quote unquote more serious. And yes, that's all a part of life, right? It's not about remaining childish and immature. Being connected to your inner child is not about being immature or childish. It's about becoming childlike because the child is where our wild innocence exists, and we need that wild innocence even as adults. The wild innocence is what tells us that everything in life is innocent, right? Like when a child screws up, when a child makes a mistake, when a child is very emotional and chaotic and wild, it's all happening in the name of innocence. But somehow we lose touch. We disconnect. We some of us go through traumatic experiences and that innocence is taken or stolen. In some other instances, it just, is a part of adulting. But we need to absolutely reconnect with this innocent wild that we once so easily embodied as children. Now, for men, it's very interesting, right? Because as boys, we are very outgoing. We are very, volatile. I mean, not every single boy, right? There are a lot of characters and personalities out there, but in many instances, as far as I'm concerned and my inner child is concerned, I was very much a wild boy. I was very much a boy that, ran across anything, climbed over whatever. I didn't think twice about climbing a tree or hiking up a snow hill or wrestling. I was very into Power Rangers and Mortal Kombat, like anything martial arts related. I also played soccer and hockey. I was very much a boy's boy growing up. And in my case, it's when it was time to transition from elementary school to high school, I felt like I'd completely and totally lost that part of myself because I lost my elementary school, I lost my friends. It felt like a deep loss in my life, and I wasn't mourning, I wasn't grieving my school, I wasn't grieving my friends. And I eventually lost that part of myself, and it didn't get to develop, right? Like the wild boy didn't get to develop and mature into the wild, because the wild man is a um, expression and extension of the wild boy. The wild boy is the foundation. So if, let's say, there's a fully grown male who's having a tough time with his wildness, and I'll get into a little bit what I mean by wildness, it's because there's an issue with the foundation, which is the wild boy. So wildness encompasses a few things. It's the emotional world of man, right? Because emotions can be wild. It's man's sexuality. Of course, sex and sexuality is expression of our animal nature, so that is also wild. The psychic component of man, so the unconscious. If we're looking at Jungian psychology, the unconscious, which I talked about last week, is everything we're not conscious of. So that is like where our shadow exists. That is where all our repressed emotional material, our repressed thoughts exist. It's within our unconscious, and our unconscious in itself is the wild aspect of us. So that's what I mean when I say man's wildness. So it's very affirming as far as my journey is concerned, right? Like, as far as the way that I deep dove into pornography, which in turn led to an addiction, is because I was so cut off. It's because I lost. It felt like it was like stolen from me in some way. Because I wasn't ready to say goodbye, I wasn't ready to let go, so felt like it was taken from me, and that was my wild innocence. So because of pornography and like how much it distorted my views on sex and intimacy and romance, that also further promoted a lot of emotional suppression, a lot of shame, a lot of guilt. So it really, 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 really severed me, my growing teenage self, let's say. I was on my way to becoming a man. It really severed me from the inner child, the inner boy. And then there was a huge gap, right? I eventually became an adult man. But like that adolescent phase, that teenage phase where the wild was supposed to develop and mature, where the wild boy was supposed to transition into the wild man. I'm not talking just about sex, but I'm talking about integrating and fully embracing my emotional nature, accepting my feelings, understanding what my inner fire meant, right? We all have a responsibility as men to tend to our inner fire, which I'll talk about in another episode. So, why it's been so important for me in my journey, and reclaiming this aspect of my wilderness, reclaiming my inner fire, integrating my emotions, integrating my primal nature, my primal self, my sexual nature, my erotic nature, my psychic intuition, my unconscious. Like, it's all been a part of inner child healing and basically holding space for my inner child. And I'm going to say another story now. And this happened around circa 2011. I was rehabilitating my knee injury, which I talked about in previous episodes. But this was the first time in my life where I experienced a very cathartic, a very deep experience as far as connecting with my inner child was concerned. So circa 2011, I was seeing a somatic energy therapist. It wasn't traditional psychotherapy. It was also body work, but more so energy, not so much like massage or anything like that. And back then, I still didn't know anything about like energy healing. I still hadn't experienced my spiritual awakening. I just pretty much saw her as like a witch. I had no idea what she was doing, a witch in a good sense, of course, but it was, working with chakras, working with energy blocks, emotional blocks in the body. Of course, I understand all of that now, but back then I didn't, but I trusted her. It was a very safe environment, and she moved me into meditation. She led me into meditation where I connected with my 12-year-old self, the 12-year-old self that basically lost his school and his friends and experienced that deep sense of loss. And the way she set up the meditation, she basically told my present self to go inside an elevator, and I was free to, press the buttons of up and down. Up meant going into the future. If I wanted to meet like a future self, or like a self, a version of myself that I wanted to become. And down meant going to a past version of self. And it was really like up to me, right? So it is also very intuitive work. It's intuitive practice. And I tend to be very intuitive. And over the years, I've been developing my intuition a lot. But even back then, I was pretty intuitive. So I knew that I had to go backwards. It wasn't so much going forward. And I remember visiting my 15-year-old self. And so the way it happened, right, like the elevator door would open and my 15-year-old self would be there and I could like have a conversation um, with that part of me. And then I remember I opened the elevator door, my 15-year-old self, like I was obviously, this was all like I was in a trance like state. I was in a meditative state with music and her guiding voice. And my 15-year-old self looked at me and he did this to me. Like, and I intuitively understood that you're on the wrong floor. You've come to the wrong age. So then I understood, and so I didn't stick around. The elevator door closed, and then instinctively I knew to go see my 12 self, because 12 years old was when I left my school. And I opened the door. I'm not gonna get into like full blown details, but it was a very cathartic meeting. My present self had a full blown emotional breakdown because it felt like I was so disconnected from this part of myself that really, really, really needed me. I'm getting emotional now because, as I said, it was unprocessed grief that I was holding on to for so long, and unprocessed emotion that I was holding on to for so long. And when that 12-year-old part of me saw my present self, it was like such a huge, I remember such a huge release, like a huge release, like a relief, right? Like, oh my God, like I'm finally not alone with this. I'm finally like, he's here. Like, I'm not alone. And yes, that was a very powerful breakthrough. And yes, it was very healing, but it's not always just one session like this. It's ongoing. I've had many meditations with my 12-year-old self, many contacts, depending on the magnitude of the trauma, of the loss, of the emotional processing that is needed. It's like an onion, right? You just need to keep peeling back the layers. But every time you do go through a layer, you get you get a gift. You get more wisdom, you get more integration, you become more unified, because that's essentially what needs to happen. You need to unify your present self with that part of you that's disconnected and disassociated. There, these versions of us, these younger parts of us are within us, but we can still be so disconnected and disassociated from them because of the feeling we have to move through in order to unify. And then that younger part of us doesn't feel alone, doesn't feel abandoned, doesn't feel rejected, is feeling seen, is feeling heard. So if let's say we want to put it under the umbrella of shadow work, yes, it's shadow integration. Yes, it's repressed material. Yes, it's denied and rejected thoughts and emotions, but it's a younger part of us. And really my inner 12-year-old, and even let's say younger versions of me, who had the fucking time of his life being a kid, right? Like when I play Eurodance, when I play Euro 90s now, I instantaneously instantaneously go back to those dance floors at weddings, at baptisms, at these halls we used to go to where weddings and baptisms used to happen, at birthday parties, in living rooms and in basements. We used to just blast Euro 90s, Euro dance. And if at any time at this point in my life when I want to connect to that part of me that will also grieve, that will also mourn, right? Because it's so hard growing up. It's so hard accepting that there's a time of your life that no longer exists. It's so hard to know that you're never going to be a child again, right? Like you're a child and now you're not a child and you're this person with all these things to do and responsibilities and adulting, which is great. Like that's what we're here to do. A part of adulting is the learning and the growing and the developing and the maturing, which is all great. But I mean, to touch base with that part of you that used to maybe do really crazy fun stuff, right? Like as children, we don't give two fucks about what we're doing. Remembering that, and in my case, it's Euro 90s that does that to me. I can tap into some really, really beautiful expressions of things that I don't necessarily tap into now because I think I'm a grown man, I'm an adult, right? I have other responsibilities. It's all a part of the change, it's all a part of the growing up. But I can experience those moments of bliss and joy and excitement and fun just by listening to a song, just by, listening to a genre of music. And that's why I think music is so powerful. I don't know what I would be doing without music. I don't know who I'd be without music, whether it's Eurodance, Greek folk, which activates obviously other things, trance, hip hop, R&B, whatever pop, whatever music we love, right? And music, especially from the past, it can help us activate younger parts of us and really learn how to be with those parts, which can make all of the difference in the here and in the now. So, as men, right, when we want to, let's say, feel more grounded, feel more present, feel more motivated, feel more courageous, we want to feel like we're taking action, we want to be in our masculine, it's our inner boy that's going to help us there. It's our inner boy that's going to help us to get there. And obviously, because of the masculine cultural conditioning, there's probably a lot of judgment. There's probably a lot of harsh, cold judgment when it comes to the inner boy because culturally, men suppress themselves. Many men, I'm not saying all men, but many men don't know how to connect to children because that would require them to tap into their inner child. I think there's a lot of fathers struggling out there and connecting with their children, whether it's boys and girls, especially boys, because fathers see their boys as extensions of themselves. And if you have fathers that have done zero, absolutely zero inner emotional work, shadow work, therapy, have done nothing to face some traumatized or wounded part of themselves, all of that will get projected onto the boy. All that will get projected onto the boy, where they don't see the boy as its own entity, its own little being, because they're just projecting all of their trauma and their wounding onto the boy. So it becomes about the unresolved issues of the father, the unresolved traumas of the father being dumped on the boy. So the boy takes all of that, right? The boy absorbs all of that, and the boy understands that this is what I have to do in order to be deemed masculine. This is what I have to do when I become, let's say, a father. This is what I have to do with my other male friends We just need to constantly be very harsh and judgmental toward each other. And then, of course, that outer voice becomes the inner voice. And then we can become very, very critical of our inner boy because it was chaotic, because it was emotive, because it was loud, because it was wild. But that's the boy. That's the magic of the boy. Like the magic of the boy is his wildness. And as far as my journey is concerned with my sexuality and my wildness as a man, right? Like it goes hand in hand with the wildness of the boy. Because to be wild as a man is also to be playful. And we need to play no matter what age we are. Obviously, when we're children, it's a very different kind of play compared to when we were playing as men. And I'm not talking about sex only, I'm talking about sports, I'm talking about athleticism, I'm talking about trying new things. I'm talking about developing skills. I'm talking about learning new skills, right? That's all a part of playing because it's through play that we learn. And when we're playing, we don't give a shit if we are right or wrong or doing it perfectly. We're not really judging or criticizing ourselves, in very harsh ways when we're playing. So we do need to incorporate play into our lives as men as well. And the way we can really build and create a healthy relationship to play as men is to connect to the inner child, is to connect to the inner boy in the way that he used to play. And maybe he didn't get to play very much, or maybe he was told not to play, or maybe, his playing was too loud and too erratic or too chaotic. But that's the man's responsibility to hold now. Because maybe some people in our lives couldn't handle us. Maybe some people in our lives couldn't hold the kind of life force and the kind of energy and the kind of power that we had. And that's okay because we all have different natures. We all have different expressions of life. Well, when we're talking about life, we're talking about life force, the life force that exists inside each and every human being. And that life force, to experience that life force and to move that life force through us is our birthright, no matter what anybody tells you or tells us. Of course, life force is sexual energy. Life force is creative energy. When we're talking about life force as children, we're not talking about anything sexual, right? That's just pure, innocent, creative energy. But that creative energy is meant to create new life eventually as we become adults and as we sexually mature. But of course, creative blocks as children will become sexual blocks as adults. So men with sexual blocks most likely have boy creative blocks, and that has to do with emotional suppression, has to do with not enough play or highly criticized play. But it's never too late. It's never too late to start, this work, no matter what age you are, especially if you're a man. To start to connect to your inner boy is really how this work begins and how this beautiful relationship starts to develop that will eventually develop the relationships around you. Because as men, we are moving through kind of an epidemic where there's a lot of loneliness and solitude. Men don't know how to connect to women. Men don't know how to connect to other men. Men don't know how to make new friends, right? We're all seeking brotherhood. We're all seeking deep, intimate friendships, not just romantic relationships with women. And if you're homosexual, whatever you identify with, we all need brotherhood. We all need a sense of camaraderie in our life. But the work begins with you. The work begins with ourselves. So if you are interested in doing this kind of work, if you are interested in working with me, I have everything set up now. If you're on one of the podcast platforms, you can find all the information on the footers. It only took me about 10 months to realize that I can post links on the podcast platform footers, but hey, we got there. If you're on YouTube, all the links are there. So if any of this is resonating, we of course do tap into work like this if this is resonating, if this is what you need. So my sessions are not cookie cutter. It's really what each man comes with, what they feel called to do, and what is alive in them. But of course, inner child activations are very much a part of it. So I'll leave it here. I'm going to cap it here. I think that's enough food for thought. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you're on one of the podcast platforms, please leave a message. Please rate the episode if you enjoy it. Please rate the podcast. It really motivates me. It really helps me out. If you're on YouTube, please hit that like, subscribe, leave a comment, engage. Whoever feels like sharing the episode, please do so as well. It really helps me out. Um, all the information as far as how to work with me can be found on templeoffire.card.co, posted on YouTube, posted on the podcast platforms. There's also an online men's circle that you can join, which will be weekly. I am waiting to get a minimum for that one, minimum of 3 men, so we can start. So that will also be available alongside monthly guided meditations. So activations as far as inner child healing is concerned, sexual energy activation, masculine feminine integration, all kinds of cool inner journeys. I will be back next week, of course, with a brand new episode. As always, every Thursday here on Bridge of Worlds, Masculine Embodiment, Spiritual Awakening podcast. And in closing, please remember that you are the medicine and I am just the messenger. Thank you very much.